Welcome to the Elaborate Topics podcast, where we focus on lab-specific strategies for medical laboratory professionals. We're proud to be the healthcare detectives that work behind the scenes to get the results needed to influence medical decisions. Let's grow together and jump right into the lab.
Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Elaborate Topics. I am your host for this podcast, Tywauna Wilson. I am so excited about this opportunity to talk with you all things medical laboratory. For those of you tuning in for the first time, hello. Elaborate Topics is a weekly podcast where myself and my co-hosts Lona Small and Stephanie Whitehead bring you topics related to laboratory and leadership to help you excel inside and outside of the laboratory. I am very excited about today's show, but before we get into the topic, I have a few announcements. Recently shared, at least at the time of this recording, ASCP, the American Society for Clinical Pathology, and CLMA, the Clinical Laboratory Management Association, has announced a partnership in 2021. So this is pretty exciting. They have partnered to bolster empowerment of laboratory professionals to achieve excellence in leadership, help support the integrity of clinical laboratory, and promote the value of the laboratory across the healthcare continuum. Through the partnership, ASCP and CLMA has said that they plan to expand upon the current and future educational offerings and share resources that will aid and guide laboratory managers and directors throughout the trajectory of their careers. And high level, they also mention that CLMA members will receive ASCP benefits, and all CLMA and ASCP members will receive free registration at the Virtual Knowledge Lab for 2021, in which both organizations will co-host. So this is pretty exciting, and I look forward to seeing what this partnership has to offer. And they said they are stronger together, and I truly believe partnerships are the way to go for 2021 and forward. If you haven't already, please share out this podcast. Please share it with your colleagues in the healthcare space, the laboratory space. Anybody can benefit from the topics that we cover on the show. You can go to directimpactbroadcasting.com and subscribe and catch all of the episodes. Also, you can leave comments and request to be on the show. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast platform: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and many others. So please share this podcast out and let us know what you think about the show. So now that you have the offer, now what? This is the big part. This is the exciting part. You have went through the interview process. You have interviewed one or two or multiple times already for your next medical laboratory scientist position, your next phlebotomy manager position, your next lab assistant position, laboratory manager, laboratory director, pathology assistant, pathology resident, whatever the position is. You have interviewed for your next position, and there has been an offer. Today's podcast will cover 5 tips for effective negotiation and considerations when reviewing your offer. Okay, tip number 1, do your research and prepare for the discussion. Knowing the typical salary range for the job is vital in your negotiations. You can't know what you should be asking for if you are not aware of what the appropriate salary range is for that particular job title. There are many places online in which you can input different variables, such as the city, the education, and years of experience, so that you know what is an acceptable salary for you. Sometimes when you move to different parts of the country and the cost of living, this salary might be different, even though the position is comparable to what you might be already doing. So being aware of the new position as well as the salary range is important. When you do your research, it helps you level set your expectations. You know that a job that's in the Ohio area, the salary probably is not going to be comparable to a job or a role that's in the California area or the New York area because the cost of living is different. So making sure you do enough research to know what a viable salary is for the position in which you are applying for. So that's tip number one. Make sure you do your research. Tip number two, consider non-salary benefits. When you think about your offer, it's not just your base salary or your shift differential. Your salary makes up a plethora of things of what the employer considers as your package. And I know, depending on where you are in your career, it is all about the pay, but there's more to a job offer than the pay. Make sure to ask for, and you can negotiate other benefits before leaving them on the bargaining table. So you can consider things like your vacation time or paid time off. So the offer may come with 10 days of vacation. You can negotiate 15 days of vacation or 20 days of vacation. Sign-on bonus. Many of our employers are offering sign-on bonus because right now we know that medical laboratory professionals are a commodity. And so employers are offering sign-on bonuses in order to be able to recruit the top talent. So this is also an incentive that you can consider when making and reviewing your offer. Retirement benefits are important as well. I know if you are early in your career, you might not be thinking about retirement benefits, 401k, 403b, if an employer still has a pension plan, which a lot of them do not have a pension plan anymore, but some of them still do. You know, those kind of benefits for consideration. What do they match? What do the employer contribute on your behalf? Relocation reimbursement, especially if you are moving, you're picking up your family and you're moving. So you are currently in Mississippi and you have an offer in North Carolina. So those relocation benefits, are they willing to cover your cost of moving or give you an allowance for that? That's something that you can negotiate as well. And those are all things you need to consider before going into a meeting. Other things outside of a salary to consider is your yearly membership into professional organizations such as ASCP, CLMA, ASCLS, AACC, and some of the other professional organizations in which have a yearly membership. And so those are things you can put into your offer as well that you can negotiate. You can also negotiate professional development, especially if you are in a leadership space, laboratory leadership space. You want to be able to remain the top talent, remain competitive, be able to offer your organization the emerging strategies. And in order to do that, you have to be in an environment that allows you to learn and grow and develop. And so the organization itself might not have that on site, but going to a conference, especially during the time when we had conferences that were on site, that might be something that you can negotiate as well into your package to be able to go to the ASCP annual meeting if it was a live workshop, just say in Boston. So you want to add that into your package that you're able to cover registration, hotel, travel. So these are all non-salary benefits that you can ask for. If your role has uniforms, there's also the consideration of a uniform allotment. So that's something that people don't typically think about. But if your role, if you're a medical laboratory scientist and you're on the bench, or a medical laboratory technician or phlebotomist or technical assistant and you're on the bench, you might be able to negotiate for maybe some uniforms. So there are other things outside of your salary or your pay that you can negotiate as well. So That's tip number 2, making sure you consider those non-salary benefits. Another thing that you can consider when I think about non-salary benefits is your title. Believe it or not, you can negotiate a title. I'm not saying that it happens all the time, but that is something that you can negotiate. I was reading about a story, and the guy's name is Lawrence, and he recently interviewed with a couple of places, and he only negotiated his title and not the compensation package for one of the companies. Although he tried to get the first organization, he had 2 offers on the table, and he tried to get the first organization to come up in the base rate of pay, they would not budge. And so when the second offer came in that closely matched the first, then Lawrence felt empowered to negotiate. He had options, he had leverage. And with the 2 offers on the table and that leverage, he used that to his advantage to make it work for him. And so with the second organization, he negotiated a different title, a better title for him. So that's one of the things too. You may not think about that as an option, but depending on your organization and what their needs are, then that could be something that you can put on the table as well. Speaking of the organization, that brings me to tip number 3. Know the organization's needs. You also want to know what their needs are, what their position is, and that will help you in your negotiation. Having a clear understanding of this in many ways can help you. So it can help you so that you come off as understanding and sympathetic to their side and what they have to work with and deal with, especially in your negotiations. So understanding what they have to offer will help you with your negotiations. As with most of our laboratories today, most of our laboratories are going through tons of changes, staffing shortages, high retirements. And so that is an opportunity for you to understand what the organization is going through and be able to utilize that to see how your skills might play a part into what the organization's needs are. Sometimes when you're on the outside looking in, you have a better perspective, and then it allows you to be able to negotiate on a more reasonable level. So really understanding and asking those questions of your HR recruiter, of the hiring manager, asking those questions in the interview process, as well as once you get the offer, so that you can make an informed decision once you are considering your offer and negotiation. Tip number 4, decide on your best alternatives and deal breakers. So you want to decide on your best alternative, so that puts you in a powerful spot. When you go into a negotiation, knowing what you will and won't accept and what alternatives you have if an agreement can't be reached will have you put you in a great spot. That way you won't feel like you have to accept whatever they offer because it's your only option. So understanding what are those deal breakers. If you need a certain salary and they aren't able to meet that, then you know what you are willing to accept. Having those alternatives. If they can't meet this salary requirement, but they are able to give me additional paid time off or additional a bonus opportunity, or is there a car allowance that they might be able to give if you are an executive and you do a lot of traveling for work? Is there a housing allowance? So for all of our travelers out there, that's one of the things that is typically standard in your package or in your contract is a housing incentive or a per diem for food allowance per day. So those are things that you want to decide on. What happens if the offer doesn't meet your initial expectations? What are your best alternatives? So being able to have that information is going to help you not feel like you've been taken advantage of, or you don't have any other options, or is either this or nothing. So many times people go into a negotiation or go into an offer and they get it and it's like, wow, this isn't even close to what I was expecting. And believe it or not, if you understand what it is that's important to you, then the salary is not a deal breaker if it doesn't meet your needs. Sometimes, and I've recently been in a negotiation where there was an offer on the table and the salary was not nearly what the person was expecting to get. But what the person wanted was professional development. They wanted to have an opportunity for exposure within the organization, because if you listen to the podcast, I don't know, several weeks ago where I talked about developing your career roadmap, that person knew that in 5 to 7 years, they wanted a system role that had high exposure, and taking this opportunity for them would not get them to that position. And so they ended up turning that position down. Even though the salary wasn't what they wanted, they probably would have worked with the salary that was offered, but the organization, one, would not give the person a title to support what they wanted to do in the long term in the next 5 to 7 years. They also wanted to be on some cross-functional teams within the healthcare organization, and the hospital organization was not willing to commit to that at this time. And so he walked away because, he would have been uprooting his family as well and wanted an opportunity to gain experience and position him for where he was seeing himself in 5 years. So those are things too. You have to consider your best alternatives. And unfortunately, in that case, they weren't able to meet his needs of his best alternative. I was recently reading about negotiations and the back and forth conversations. And I know as laboratory professionals, sometimes that back and forth is nerve-wracking and we may not want to engage in those discussions, but having a back and forth conversation really does leads to results. I was reading about the story of Annabelle and how she negotiated an internal offer. She was offered a role and she initially sought more vacation time, but when it became clear that that wasn't available, the organization was not willing to give more vacation time, then she asked for an increase of about $8,000 more than the starting offer. The hiring manager came up $2,000, at which point Annabelle went back and asked for $5,000 more than the initial. So she originally started out at $8,000. The hiring manager came back with a $2,000 increase, and then she went back and asked for $5,000, and they eventually settled on $4,000 more than the offer they began with. So it is worth it. You do have to be reasonable with your negotiation, your back and forth. So asking for something outlandish is probably not going to be effective, but employers do count on you sending in an counter to their offer. Remember, negotiation is healthy and it is assumed that you will make the negotiation. You will not necessarily accept the first offer. Now, again, you have to consider your experience, your education, what it is that they're looking for, what can you bring to the table. But employers know that you probably will not accept the first offer. So just as you set the bar high when giving the employer the salary you want, they set the bar low. So you're like, I want X amount of money. And they like, here's our median range, or here's the midpoint, or here's what we are prepared to offer. They want to get you for as low as possible. Not always the case, but a lot of times they want to get you for as low as possible so that they will always start with their lowest bid most times, unless they know that it's a very competitive person that they're trying to recruit and they know that they have to come with a better offer right off the bat. So sometimes holding out will get you a better salary that is still within the range. So I know it's not comfortable, but that is part of the process of doing the negotiations. And then tip number 5, always, always, always ask for it in writing. Don't settle for a verbal contract for anything. So you may negotiate more vacation, you may negotiate a higher salary, you may negotiate a bonus or housing allowance or uniform allowance or cell phone stipend. Whatever it is that you negotiate, make sure that you get it in writing. When a negotiated item isn't put into writing, then you have little to no recourse if the company later claims that they didn't agree to that. So get used to getting everything in writing. Document, 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 as we do for our laboratory results and our maintenance logs and everything that keeps the laboratory in compliance. Make sure that you document and get it in writing. Get everything that was agreed upon in writing immediately. Make that your personal policy. And not just in the workplace. You should always get any contracts, any agreements, even if it's with a friend or family member. If you loan somebody some money, you should always get it in writing. It'll save you a lot of trouble later if you have it in writing. I know it sounds harsh, but it is necessary so that you don't get taken advantage of, and it keeps both parties honest, quite frankly. It's just to get it in writing. I was recently in a Facebook group, and one of the things that came up that made me think about this, get it in writing, is a colleague of ours in our profession recently took on an opportunity. They interviewed for a first shift position, and they were hired with the premise that they would be working on first shift. And then when they got to the job, then they found out that they were really hired for a third shift technologist position. So it was kind of a bait and switch. They got to the company, they had moved because the job was out of the area for them. So they relocated and they got into the position only to find out that it really wasn't a first shift position that they were recruited for. The needs were on third shift, and that is what they ended up having them work, is third shift. And when they asked the employer about that, then the employer said, well, we typically post for first shift opportunities because we get more candidates that way. And even if our positions are really, the second shift or third shift, and that's what they tell people now. And that's not ethical. That's not a good way of doing business. Of course, you really should, if the position is on first shift, then the person should be training and working on first shift versus working on another shift. But, so the person was kind of in a catch-22. They got into the role, they moved, they relocated. Now they're on third shift, and either they could stay or they could go. And if you've ever moved, you know that moving is not an easy feat. I don't know if they received a sign-on bonus. That wasn't really clear. They received a sign-on bonus or any kind of relocation assistance. But then you have those implications as well if a position doesn't work out. Because typically when you get a sign-on bonus or relocation incentive, then you are committing to giving the employer so many years of service. So always get it in writing because it saves you later. So now that they didn't have the offer in writing, they are pretty much stuck in a position of either working their time out or trying to find something else. And that's very unfortunate that particular situation happened, but it does. And unfortunately, all companies are not ethical in their hiring practices. They should be, but it comes to being able to ask great questions too and getting it in writing. John Maxwell says that leaders ask great questions. Good leaders ask great questions. And so one of the things of being a leader in your due diligence is to get it in writing. And here's a bonus tip that wasn't part of our 5, but don't take it personal. Negotiation is not personal. I know, I know. It might feel like you're bargaining your personal worth when negotiating salary, but really it's not. Companies typically have standard grids that they use for determining your salary of a job title. So, according to your years of experience, your education, so they're not judging you as a person. So avoid letting your feelings get to you and get the best of you and show in your negotiation. So if you know the negotiation is going to be heated, make sure you take some time so that you are able to self-assess yourself and your emotions to allow for the negotiation to be as smooth as possible. I'll leave you with this one last story of making sure that you get what you deserve. It's really satisfying. And it's a story about Mitch. He was eager to ask for a raise after a year of a whole lot of hard work and dedication in his new role. He had made the mistake of not asking for enough during the interview process, so he didn't really negotiate up front. And when they inquired about his salary requirements, and because sometimes we're not prepared or afraid to ask that they will maybe rescind the offer, he was confident that the position commanded a significantly higher salary, which is what he thought. Which is to say he wasn't going to be satisfied with a standard 3 to 5% raise. So typically if you are internal and you get promoted, a lot of companies will give you a standard 3 to 5% raise. Anything outside of that, you definitely have to negotiate, and it depends. So depending on what your role is, if you're moving from a team leader position where maybe you had one site, you maybe had 10 direct reports or no direct reports, to a laboratory director position, or maybe laboratory manager. Maybe that was too big of a jump within that organization. But you move from a team leader to a laboratory manager position where now you have 40 direct reports, and maybe you have 2 locations that you are now over versus your scope. And a 3% increase might not be comparable to if you were an outside candidate coming in doing that role. And so one of the things that Mitch did, he knew he wasn't going to be satisfied with that 3 to 5% increase. So he went in with his data and his list of accomplishments. So, and I know we've talked about this before on one of the podcast episodes, but you have to document those things you do well, those accomplishments. So have your own personal brag board. So he had his data, his list of accomplishments, and then he was able to get himself an increase of 12% because he was able to go in. He understood what the company's needs were. He understood what he could deliver. He understood what the job requirements were, what the salary band were. He understood all of those things. He was able to prove that he was in the role and he was able to do the job well. And so that was able to get him higher than what they probably would have offered him at 3 to 5%. So getting what you deserve can be satisfying, but you cannot be afraid to ask. If you don't ask, you don't get. So to recap today's podcast, 5 tips to consider for your next offer and effective negotiation. Tip 1, make sure you prepare for the meeting and do your research. Tip 2, consider non-salary benefits such as vacation time, uniforms, professional development, bonuses, those kind of things. Know the organization's needs. How long has the position been open? Sometimes you can use that as an advantage. If the position has been open for 6 months, 8 months, either they're not getting enough qualified candidates, or maybe in that case, the salary may not be competitive. So go in understanding their needs and what you can bring to the table. Tip 4, decide on your best alternatives and deal breakers. If they offer you a salary that's $20,000 less than what you make, is that okay? Know what it will take for you to walk away or for you to accept and move on, what you're going to be happy and content with. And then tip number 5 is always, always, always get it in writing. Know that the offer and the negotiation is not personal. It is not about you. Both you and the company want a win-win solution. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Elaborate Topics with your laboratory mentor, Tywauna Wilson. My co-hosts, Lona Small and Stephanie Whitehead, appreciate you tuning in every week to listen to our show. If you like what you heard today, you can listen to previous shows or subscribe at directimpactbroadcasting.com or your favorite podcast platform. You can also send us an email at elaboratetopics, that's all one word, at directimpactbroadcasting.com to learn more about the topics on this show and to be a guest on this show. If you want to keep up with me and what I'm doing, you can catch me on LinkedIn at Tywauna Wilson, or you can catch me on Facebook at Coach T Wilson. That's CoachTee Wilson. And I look forward to keeping up with you and you checking up with another episode of Elaborate Topics. So please tune in next week for another amazing episode. Have a great week.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Elaborate Topics, where your hosts discussed relevant strategies for laboratory professionals. Please subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and listen to us on directimpactbroadcasting.com. Stay tuned for another episode with information you can use to excel in your laboratory career.